Welcome to Vigilant News, everybody. We've got a special show for you today. I'm going to talk about a subject that I've been fascinated with for quite some time. And I'm entitling this one, Where Does the CIA Begin and Our Culture End? And I think it's a valid question to ask for anyone who's taken the time to actually study this subject of the intelligence apparatus, how these tentacles of our society kind of wrap around us in ways that we don't really perceive but are ever present. And just how much these things interact with us and influence us in ways that we might not detect. You know, especially in the truther world, because if you're somebody who's trying to get out what you think is important information, whether it's hidden cancer cures or information about how elections are rigged or all sorts of different things. I mean, there seems to be no end to the amount of things that one can research and discover are in some way acting as part of the hidden agenda. You're going to encounter people who call you an agent, an asset, a patriot. You probably have heard about this before in the comments. Like maybe you're posting a comment and the person who's created the content calls you an agent, or you think that that person is an agent, or you think that other people in the comments are agents. So I think there's a pretty interesting subject to cover, and I think it's most especially pressing because we're, in my opinion, approaching an age in our society where these things have been happening for arguably at least a century. And through the advent of Trump's influence and other things that have happened as a result of the internet, the emergence of the kind of truth movement on the internet, it seems like more and more people are aware of just how much our society is influenced by these subversive influences. And although I've referred to it as the CIA here, we don't necessarily need to think about it as just the Central Intelligence Agency. We can think about it in terms of all intelligence agencies. So I'm going to cover a couple things today. This is a huge topic, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything that could be covered because we'd be here, literally I could probably spend multiple lifetimes trying to cover all this stuff because, as I'm going to argue in the show, I think the hand of the intelligence apparatus is itself something that is hiding a deeper set of influences, something that I've often referred to as the dark occult or the cabal. Sometimes people refer to it as the Illuminati, things like this. And the Illuminati is probably one that's the most famous, but if you've studied even that, you know that that is itself just one of the front groups that have emerged across history. The Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, founded by Adam Weishaupt, who allegedly there was a man ferrying papers or couriering papers from one area, I believe it was Bavaria, to the next, was struck down by lightning, and that's how the information that we know about the Bavarian Illuminati was supposedly revealed, which kind of sounds like a fantastic story, to be honest with you. That itself draws another question. Well, what is history? Because so much of our history seems to be manipulated and fabricated, and if anyone you talk to doubts that, just ask them, well, how much do you think has been manipulated in our current media? This is something I often, use to argue the idea that we can't really blindly trust anything for many different reasons that I'll avoid the temptation to go down a rabbit hole with. But from an epistemological perspective, which is the philosophy of knowledge, which I like to refer to as a science of knowledge, meaning how do you actually know something is true? How do you know it's false? How do you navigate the space in between? Well, what you come to find out is basically almost everything that we believe is itself only a tiny little sliver of the whole truth. And for human beings, that's challenging because, we are possessed of all these different ideas. We learned about all these different things in school and history, on YouTube, on the internet, from, universities, from talking heads on TV, all these different sources. But how do you really know any of it's necessarily true or false? And ultimately, the answer is you don't. So that's why I use what I've called the omniological process, or some people refer to it as a bicameral process, which is basically, these are just fancy terms for saying you try to assess all information thoroughly and completely, exhaustively. So if I claim something is true, that, for example, the CIA has influenced our culture, or the intelligence apparatus has influenced our culture in ways that are almost total, meaning that nearly everything that we interact with, from advertisements on TV to pharmaceutical companies to the technology developed in your cell phone to the way TVs work to refrigerators to you name it, education system, everything, IQ tests, you name it. It's all in some way seems to be influenced by the intelligence apparatus. It might not be directly. It might not be that literally the intelligence apparatus through some kind of front organization like In-Q-Tel, which, by the way, if you didn't know, In-Q-Tel is an organization that is, as far as I know anyway, based on the information I've received, is a front group for the funding of various technology projects at the behest of the intelligence apparatus. And the intelligence apparatus itself is a kind of front group for the people that founded them. The modern day intelligence state was developed sometime between the First and Second World War, although it arguably has earlier tracings. If you're familiar with the idea that a government, having been influenced by a corrupt force, can make things illegal so that it can use that illegal front to operate a black market to raise massive amounts of funds and mobilize a kind of criminal organization through that black market to then rear up a set of human networking connections that can be then mobilized later in a more legal capacity, than what I've just referred to is exactly what happened after World War II through the Prohibition era. This is something that Whitney Webb talks about in her books, One Nation Under Blackmail, Part 1, which gets into the early history of how the intelligence apparatus was created through Prohibition. Prohibition created a massive, massive need or business opportunity for alcohol and other things associated with alcohol. The same usual type of stuff you find in back alleys where crack dealers are selling crack or heroin or ecstasy or prostitutes or child prostitutes or slavery or anything. So anything that is not sanctioned in the white market, we might say, the place where goods and services can be sold legally, will then get sold in the black market. Things where that will be sold, in a place that it's not legal to do so. So behind the scenes, and there's a kind of association effect where, if you're going to sell crack, if you're going to sell heroin, if you're going to sell fake licenses or passports or you name it, then there's a kind of interesting effect where there's like a stickiness that happens, where by virtue of the fact that you're selling one thing in the black market, you will likely encounter other things in that black market. And if you're an enterprising criminal, then eventually you're going to be like, well, I should just learn how to control everything, or at least be influenced by everything. So back in the back when Prohibition became a thing, which I believe, I'm going to try to do this just kind of off the top of my head and not dwell too much in the nuanced facts, but I'm just going to give generalities here so I don't make a fool of myself at the same time. The intelligence apparatus, as we know it, emerged as a result of these World War I institutions that were fostered by the globalists of yesteryear, as I like to call them. If you've seen any of my interviews with Whitney, if you've seen any of my interviews with Courtney Turner about the Tavistock organization, the Tavistock Institute of National Affairs, then you know that the people who are behind the globalist movement are really, let's see, what's the best way to describe them? I think of a good way to describe them as a hidden criminal syndicate. They often operate in the realm of international banking and overseas fairly lawless jurisdictions. They tend to want a one world government. They tend to have no scruples and no moral decency at all, to the extent that they will use diseases, pollution, false flag attacks, disasters, you name it, anything they can to advance their agenda. And people rightly refer to them as being satanic. And so these same organizations that gave rise to the mafioso families of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. As a matter of fact, there's good evidence to believe that the mafia itself was an aspect of, I believe it was British intelligence from the 1800s, and that these organizations, that were also working with things like the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, the various companies from the mercantile period in history, which is somewhere between like 1650 and 1780, something like that, before the Enlightenment movement really took off and the whole wealth of nations concept became a thing. These organizations were amassing power and wealth through trade. And if you go back even further, then you have the Venetian bankers, when Venice was settled somewhere in the like 1500s, that they realized basically that you could you could manipulate a sovereign, so a king or a queen or warlord or a doge or things like this, which doge refers to basically a ruler in Italy. You can manipulate them through the power of the purse, meaning the control of money itself. And you could also manipulate them through the black market. So you control culture on one end, you decide through culture, and you manipulate culture because politics is downstream from culture, which I think is accurately stated. I believe that was Andrew Breitbart who said that. And somebody else said that culture is downstream from religion, which I think is also accurate. And if we want to go any further than that, we could say that religion is downstream from the human experience, our psychology, what makes us who we are, and reality itself. So our relationship with reality gives us these habits, we are influenced by the way we interact with reality, which then influences our choices and what we believe, which is our culture. And then that culture influences what we want to do, given the reality we're in and the fact that we have to live with other people. And because we live with other people, we have to make decisions collectively, and that's what politics is. So by manipulating all of that, you can manipulate what is socially taboo in a culture. And then through those taboos, you can decide what's in the white market and what's in the black market. And you can control what's in the white market, kind of like what we have today. What are the big box grocery stores or stores? They're almost all globalist entities. BlackRock and Vanguard own almost every white market institution that you can imagine. And then the black market, although we can't necessarily look them up on Yahoo Finance or things like this, is good reason to believe that likely the same people who are controlling the opium trade in China or the banana republics of the late 19th, and early 20th century are the same people who gave rise to the CIA-funded cocaine trade of the 60s and 70s and 80s, which then gave rise to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So by controlling the white market, by controlling culture, by controlling religion and politics, you can decide what is legal and what is not. And then you can manipulate that through various means, usually media itself, but also media and education. And then on the other side of the coin, the black market, you can manipulate all the things that can't happen in the black market. And because you control everything, because you're like the fascist system that moves energy from one part of your body to the next, or you're like the water canal ways or the circulatory system that moves blood from my arm to my head, to my heart, to my kidneys, you can kind of influence everything. And that's exactly what these international banking families and these merchant class manipulators have done, and they've been doing this arguably for a very long time. But not to not get too off topic, which I certainly have a tendency to do, and thank you for indulging me here. With prohibition, they created a black market instantly. And then with that, all the people who were into alcohol, which was a significant amount, they spent the past 60 years before that really getting people to accept alcohol in their lives and to consume it. Now, we've always had a propensity for alcohol, but arguably, and this is something that, we got to just trust whatever we find online, or do we? And this is what the omniological process is all about, is that when you find something online as a fact, let's say you look up something on the Wikipedia that says that alcohol consumption was essentially promoted in the late 1800s, and then prohibition came in and made all that illegal. Then how do you know it's true? And the answer is you don't necessarily know it's true. There's a sophisticated process you can use to try to hopefully determine it's true by assessing, well, where did the evidence come from to determine that? And then analyzing, well, is that evidence interpreted properly? Did we really find that? So you try to get your hands on the actual evidence itself, which is not easy when you're dealing with things in history, because often you're analyzing things that have faded into the sunset of time, so to speak. So you can't really just go to a place and pick up the dirt and be like, oh, look, yeah, this is the thing I'm trying to study. So you got to use basically a faith-based process. You have to assume that this thing that this idea, this presumed fact, this claim might be valid or true. And then you look at the evidence and you say, well, if it's not true, what would that mean? If it is true, what would that mean? And you try to do that every time you look at a fact or a piece of information. And obviously that's a very complicated process. But what I just described is exactly what any good detective does. Use a fact-based process of elimination. So when it comes to the Prohibition era, they created a massive black market. Then they fostered through various, behind the scenes, hidden hand kind of a situation. They fostered a criminal organization. The mafia was apparently part of this. The Jewish mafia, the Italian mafia, the criminal organizations all over the place in the United States, but then that reached everywhere into the world, of course, because these organizations, interestingly, tend to be connected with each other at the very least, if not fostered by the same hidden hand. And I don't think it's necessarily accurate to say that it is the same singular organization. I think what we actually have is a situation where there's multiple competing groups. It seems like, if I was to make a grand statement about what I think is happening with these groups, is that these criminal organizations, this criminal syndicate, the cabal, the dark occult, things like this, the globalists, they operate in the space in between organizations. So they'll foster an organization like the mafia while they're also controlling the FBI and building up the FBI, which is exactly what happened. Then you create a central intelligence apparatus, not necessarily the CIA, but a central intelligence apparatus, the precursor, I believe it was the OSS. Then there's about a half a dozen other organizations with equally, obscure names, like the Office of Strategic Systems or something like that. I'm betraying the fact that I don't know these terms perfectly well as other people, and those other people, congratulations. But I think in this case, the point here is that when you control those sides, then you can build up a criminal mercenary class, basically, the people that were ferrying alcohol. And that's like the Bronfmans of Canada. Those were one of the biggest families. So the Bronfman family got its start during the Prohibition era, selling black market booze to the elites in the places of all over the place, and then in the United States and elsewhere. Then you've got Meyer Lansky. He was doing a bunch of things like this. Then you had all that whole criminal organization literally created an alliance, an actual government-sponsored alliance. I can't remember the terminology or the name of the document that proves this. But what we're talking about here is basically that the government, in their quest to try to gain intelligence of various things, made a partnership with these criminal organizations, and in doing so made a partnership with the thing behind the criminal organization, which are the globalists, as I refer to them, or the criminal syndicate, or the dark occult. I'll be using these terms a lot because, we have to use kind of like placeholders for these concepts because we don't have a lot of clear facts about them. So I'm going to try to do my best to describe all this stuff as much as I can, doing the best we have to what we got to work with. And so the Central Intelligence Agency, which got its start in, I believe it was right after the Second World War, was kind of like the latest iteration in a slowly growing intelligence agency beast. And mind you, when the Second World War had finished, this was 1945, we were already 20 years deep into mass media as we know it. So through the development of mass media, you have the ability to do something you really didn't have the power to do before. So let's take a step back in time. And let's ask ourselves, if you're a criminal cabal, you're a bunch of, let's say, we'll think of them as the typical type of Machiavellian type. So you're like a Doge in Italy or in Venice. You're rich, you're wealthy, you have massive amounts of money. You have the ability through fractional reserve banking to basically lend money to people with no end. And then they pay you real goods and services for that, meaning they pay you through labor. They pay you through land, they pay you through spices, they pay you through alcohol, gold. So you get real goods for money that basically didn't even exist until the person who wanted it came into your doors, which is, again, it's a very old game. And I don't have time to go into it now, but one thing, I wrote a series with Ryan, which, by the way, he wanted to be here, but he's super busy doing some other stuff. And admittedly, we had to pre-record this before I left for Arizona. So by the time you watch this, it's Saturday, the 27th, 28th? No, 27th. And it'll be airing on the 29th. So I'm in Arizona right now while this is going on. Anyway, you have, we wrote a series called Dirty Money. And we're going to, at some point, re-release that. We might even turn it into a book because I've been fascinated by finance for a really long time. was one of the first things I discovered. I watched The Secrets of Oz, or The Secret of Oz, maybe, with Bill Still, and they talk about where money comes from, how you can literally create money, not through debt, but you can create it through an infrastructure project, which other peoples have talked about. And it's really interesting. It's like, how do you create money through an infrastructure project? And then what's crazy is that you'd think money that's created seemingly out of nothing would just lead to inflation or lead to, you know, corruption or stuff like that. But that's not always the case. And it's not really the money that's the problem. It's the fact that people don't understand what money is, which is a ruler for measuring value in a society. And what a society is it's an organization of people who are working in a trust capacity to manifest the quality of life. And the same basic concept is present in any family. So if you have a family, you and your wife, your kids, even your neighbors to a certain extent, you agree not to violate each other's rights. And as a result of that, you create a certain level of peace. And then through that peace, you can do things to manifest the quality of life. If you've got a chicken coop and you've agreed with your neighbor that you don't want your chicken coop to be stolen and your chickens to be stolen or killed for your neighbor's food, then you actually have the ability to improve the quality of your life through having a chicken coop in your backyard. So that basic concept of honoring other people's rights, which you need a rule of law system to do, then begets the capacity to use those rights. And every time you use your rights, you create wealth, you create value, especially in a social capacity, meaning in society. You create things that other people want, and then you need a medium or mechanism to transfer that wealth to other people. You can use straight barter and trade to do it, but that has certain limitations. So in most advanced societies, and this has even been done in prisons, they find some medium of exchange, which is what money is. So by manipulating money, and manipulating demand and manipulating what people believe and manipulating the politics and media, you can basically control almost every aspect of society itself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, if I can use that fancy term, is what I want to talk to you about today, is the part of society that manipulates us, that manipulates our beliefs, that manipulates our values, that manipulates our choices, is a very important part of the whole grand machine that we call human civilization. It's very poorly understood in modern times. I don't know if it ever has really been well understood, at least in recent history, although I'm sure it has been, because I think, you know, history, I think this is the guy who authored Huckleberry Finn. I can't remember his name, but anyway, he said something like history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, which I think is a pretty good description of how things work. So other people have figured this out before. And hopefully, I think, you know, the people who represent the patriots, as I refer to them, Donald Trump, have figured this out as well and are attempting to do something beneficial for humanity to prevent the globalist nightmare from coming to fruition. So where does this? What should we start this conversation? Before we get into it, I want to ask you to go ahead and like this video, share this video if you are have the ability to, and put it on your social media. It really helps support us. You can also go into the links in the description and use the promo code Justin Stillness. That's Justin, my first name, Justin, Stillness, STILLNESS. And you can use that for 10% off of your order at ascentnutrition.com. So there's a link in the description. If you use that link, it'll automatically track your purchase. You can also subscribe. And when you use the subscription, you get 10% off every time that subscription goes out. And you also get free shipping. So it's just like Amazon. So it's very convenient, easy. Lance, the guy who founded Ascent Nutrition, a good friend of mine, like really wanted to make it competitive and inexpensive for people to get some really high quality products. Like, having been working with them for a while now, it's pretty shocking how unhealthy most supplements are and how really amazing a lot of the things that we offer at Ascent Nutrition are. So definitely check that out. If I was to make a recommendation, humic and fulvic is very popular. It's a detox. It's a kind of like detox probiotic all in one. It can help deal with brain fog. I took it to recover after my hospitalization back in February of this year. So yeah, definitely check that out. Pine needle extract is also something amazing. It'll help with colds, flus. So does humic and fulvic, actually. It literally helps break down viruses, and if you believe in that kind of thing. And but for for pine needle extract, they're actually out of stock right now. So Lance has been reminding me to tell you that they are about to go back into stock. I believe it's as early as this week coming up. So definitely check on that. It can be used to break down spike proteins, which as far as I'm concerned, like everybody should be taking this stuff because, you know, unfortunately, something like 2 billion people got vaccinated with the spike protein spike shot. And that means there are walking factories for spike proteins that are shedding all over the place. At least that's what seems to be happening. And, you know, they want people to get their boosters. So if you want to avoid the inevitable issues that come from the spike protein, as well as to help deal with any issues if you did get the jab, the pine needle extract can help with that, as well as a bunch of other things that can help with repairing nerve myelin sheath, believe it or not. So if you have any type of autoimmune issue, that can help deal with the nerve damage associated with the myelin sheath. And they can help repair your gut from glyphosate, which is that Roundup junk that they put into so much of our food, unfortunately, these days. All right, so I want to start with a video just to show you, because, you know, when I talk about how much the CIA has infiltrated our lives, you know, it might seem like, yeah, whatever. Okay, Justin, don't be ridiculous. No, you know, nobody believes you, that kind of thing. But it's really pretty striking, like how much this is not only has been happening, but it's actually acknowledged. And we're going to go through 3 pieces of information today. I'm going to resist the urge to do something, you know, way too long and undigestible, because I tend to want to be very thorough. If you've ever read my articles on justindeschamps.substack.com, then you know my average article's length is something like 4,000 words. You know, some of my longer ones are up at like 8,000 words. It's because I just like to pack in a lot of information. I think context is so important, especially when you're talking about complex subjects, that if you really want to get your idea communicated across, it's like, how many brushstrokes does it take for a painter to paint a beautiful painting? Well, in the same way, a word is like a brushstroke. So if you want something very clear, if you want a photographic quality of a painting, you got to use a lot of brushstrokes. And if I want my message, the thing that I'm trying to communicate, to be clear, I need to use a lot of words. So anyway, all right, so let's take a look at this video. This video is from an outfit called TRT World. And I just found this video online, so it's not like I have a relationship with these guys, but the first couple minutes of this really dig into, and arguably the rest of the video does too, no doubt, how much the intelligence apparatus has been infesting our lives with all sorts of shenanigans. So let's go ahead and
You might not be surprised to hear that the US Department of Defense participated in the production of movies like Black Hawk Down or Air Force One. But did you know that the Pentagon partially funded the first Iron Man movie? Or that they collaborated on the latest Wonder Woman film? You've heard about the military-industrial complex. Well, welcome to the military entertainment complex, the long historical partnership between the US Department of Defense and Hollywood. One of the most successful examples of this relationship goes all the way back to 1927, when the US military helped produce the film Wings, a war romance celebrated for the technical accuracy of its air combat scenes. The film won the first ever Academy Award, was a commercial and critical success, and led to a huge boost in recruitment. Elmer Davis, head of the Office of War Information in the 1940s, famously said, "The easiest way to inject a propaganda idea into most people's minds is to let it go through the medium of an entertainment picture, where they do not realize that they are being propagandized." A Freedom of Information Act request in 2017 revealed that the Department of Defense either funded or collaborated on over 800 films as far back as 1911, and backed 900 TV projects between 2005 and 2017 alone.
All right, so that's a good enough little beef stick of the subject. I'm going to put that video in the link. I'm going to put the link in the description if you want to watch the whole thing. The whole thing's about 12 minutes. And I want to just go over one of the quotes in the beginning. See if I can find it here. Here it is. So there's a man named Elmer Davis, and he's the head of the Office of War Information in the 1940s. And he says the easiest way to inject a propaganda idea into most people's minds is to let it go through the medium of entertainment picture, where they do not realize that they are being propagandized. It's a rare admission. I'm going to pull up the quote here so you guys see. There it is right there. So it's a pretty rare admission for the type of thing we're talking about here. Now, keep in mind, this man was working for the military before there was a CIA. So this idea of the CIA manipulating our culture is actually not even really a proper description of it. It goes much further back than that. And I would say that the idea of manipulating culture to manipulate people might be one of the oldest forms of mass mind manipulation that exists in modern culture. And there's a very important reason why that I'm going to try to not spend too much time on. But let's keep this quote in mind as we go through this information here. So why is it that manipulating culture is so powerful, and what does that reveal about our relationship with the people we share life with on this world? Well, any parent realizes, if hopefully they realize, and certainly a school teacher realizes, that every child needs structure. If you have too much idleness, if the child can do literally anything they want, then what ends up happening is the child is now, the thing that's driving that child through life is their primitive needs, their needs for food, their needs for entertainment. When they become old enough, their needs for sex, their needs for social acceptance, their needs for validation, all these different primal needs that are themselves hardwired into our brains, particularly in the limbic system, so in the midbrain. And these are very ancient and very powerful mechanisms, because ultimately your sense of self is not just derived through you. It's not like you were born and the mental hardware or the ego that you have, that you grow up with, was just like slowly downloaded into you from this cosmic realm. It's actually an interaction with every other person and everything in reality. It's like who you are is slowly taking shape in the same way that a sculptor slowly brings a statue or a marble carving into shape as a result of them peeling away layers of the marble. Or a painting is a very similar type of thing too. So what that means is that if you can control the environment, the information field that a person is developing in or inhabiting, period, whether they're an adult or a child, then you can often control almost everything about that person. If you've ever heard of the idea of Plato's cave, Plato's cave it's an allegory. I actually have an article I wrote about some of this that I think, let me just see how long this is. It's actually not too long. So since we've got some time today, I'm going to play a little bit of this too. So before I do that though, Plato's cave is an allegory about this thing that I'm talking about. That you're in a relationship with reality. And there's a book that I've talked about many times on the show Knowledge Base called the Urantia book, which describes religion as our relationship with reality itself. But more so than that, it's actually God. So not to get on too lost on a tangent here, but you might ask yourself, well, what is God? Well, you could think of God in a couple different ways. There's the God of all that is, meaning we move, breathe, and have our being in God. So the air we are inhabiting right now, that is a part of God. Our minds are a part of God. The atoms in our bodies are a part of God. The earth we're standing on is a part of God. The solar system, the sun, the galaxy, and the galaxy cluster, and ultimately everything that has been, is now, and will be is all part of God. Okay, so that's the God of all that is. But then there's another type of God. There's the God, the Son God, as I think is a good way to think about it, which is the ultimate goal of all existence. So God has not only the body that we move, breathe, and have our being in, but there's also the God of the aspiration, the God of what we're aiming at. And when we're trying to become the best version of ourselves, when we're trying to pursue excellence, then we're trying to become a son of God. And that, I think that word son, S-O-N, it sounds a lot like S-U-N for a reason. Because if you could think about, not to get too esoteric here or, philosophic, but if you could think about your life, like, it's not necessarily clear what the right decision is. I mean, yes, there is some things are very clear, like, don't beat your kids, and don't steal, and, don't sexually abuse people, things that are pretty obvious to most people. But it's not so obvious that nobody does those things I just mentioned. As a matter of fact, we find ourselves in an age where there's a whole lot more of that kind of stuff happening than we might like to think. So life in a lot of ways is filled with uncertainty. The uncertainty of life can be characterized as a type of darkness. You might ask yourself, why is it that children are afraid of the dark? And from a neurological perspective, children are afraid of the dark because the way our brains are set up is when we enter a place of unknown. When you go down the stairs as a kid and you're 5 years old and you're going into the basement, which happened to me many times when I was a kid, and my mind would kind of fill that empty blackness with monsters, things that I was scared of. And part of the reason it does that is because our brain, from a survival perspective, is anticipating a worst case scenario. And that anticipating it means that our imagination is going to fill anytime we could enter a place where the unknown is made contact with. Like when you go into a dark basement, you don't know what's in the darkness. So you're literally like seeing into the unknown. And that looking into the unknown causes your brain to fill that unknown space with potentially bad things. And then because they're potentially seeing monsters there or bad things, you're going to prepare yourself. Your body's literally going to prepare itself for what might be happening in that bad things place. And there's a part of our brain, the adrenal glands inside the brain particularly, release a set of compounds called glucocorticoids, I believe they're called. I'm reading a book right now called The Indoctrinated Brain by Michael Nels, who is on Tucker Carlson, that does a beautiful job describing a lot of the neurology that I'm talking about now, although he doesn't focus on this topic particularly. But the point is that when a child fears the unknown, it's because that part of what they fear is something they haven't yet mastered or conquered. And when we fear the unknown, and when we're engaging with the unknown, we're engaging with all these different potentialities. And so children need structure, because if they don't know how to walk carefully along the path of life, then they could very easily stumble off of that narrow path, or the stairway to heaven, so to speak. And as a result, they could make mistakes, and then they can become addicted to their mistakes, and the world is filled with all sorts of booby traps laid out by the satanic forces, which I think is a good place to refer to them like that, because they do not necessarily want to use their power, influence, and knowledge to create a world where people are growing towards that goal of becoming a son of God, which means becoming a perfect representation of all that is within a human form in reality. They don't want that necessarily to happen, because then you've got a world of near perfection. And when you hear perfection, don't necessarily think, oh my God, we're all trying to be perfectionists or anything. It just means that you're just trying to do your best. Everybody knows what a good day is when you don't hurt your wife, or you're not messing with your kids too much, or you don't accidentally get into an accident on the way to work or something like this. So a good day is an excellent day. And when we pursue excellence, the world, our lives, the people that we engage with are made better. They experience goodness. And so a child needs structure, to get all the way back to what I was talking about there, because without structure, a child will lose themselves in the pathways off of the narrow path, and when you have a world filled with a lot of temptation, like we have now, we have the devices right now where a kid could either find something really amazingly inspiring and educational about the way the world works, and therefore be profoundly influenced in a good way with this device, or they could find porn, or they could find child porn, or they could talk to a stranger in a chat room and be led to get human trafficked. So the risks of children making mistakes, and then as a result of those mistakes being damaged or harmed, is real. It affects us. The children that are alive right now are going to grow up to be adults one day, and we're going to have to live with those people. And if they are negatively influenced by negative forces, then they're going to have a lot of problems. So how does that relate to Plato's cave? Well, Plato's cave is itself describing the fact that because there's a lot of unknowns in the world, and because we can't really see the full truth directly. It's not like we wake up in the morning and we see the truth of our room, we see the truth of what the day has to hold for us, we see the truth of what mistakes are there and avoid them. You know, it's kind of, there's a lot of unknowns out there, and we've got to use our sagacity, our critical thinking, our ingenuity, our intelligence to try to hopefully make good choices and not stumble into the pitfalls of despair, so to speak. So what Plato's cave is talking about, in one respect, not explicitly, so the surface meaning is different than what I'm describing, but the basic concept is this, which is that because we don't interact with reality directly, something that I call the biological virtual reality environment, which basically means that our bodies create a reality for us through our thoughts, through what we focus on, through what we think things mean. You can actually manipulate somebody's perception and ultimately get them to believe in a reality that doesn't exist, and then through that control them entirely. So I just want to play a little bit of this video, as much as it takes to get the point across. It deals with this idea of Plato's cave.
The ancient Greeks were emphatic that philosophy was not just an elaborate abstract exercise. It was, they felt, a deeply useful skill that should be learned and practiced by all in order to help us to live and die well. No one believed this more than Plato, who was passionate in his defense of philosophy as a kind of therapy for the soul. One of the most forceful stories he told on behalf of the utility of philosophy was what has become known as the Allegory of the Cave. It is perhaps the most famous allegory in philosophy. This was a story that was intended, as he wrote, to compare the effect of education and the lack of it on our nature. At the start of Book 7 of his masterpiece, The Republic, Plato tells us about some people living imprisoned in a cave. They've always lived there and don't know anything of the outside world. There is no natural light in this cave. The walls are damp and dark. All the inhabitants can see comes from the shadows of things thrown up on the wall by a light of a fire. The cave dwellers get fascinated by these reflections of animals, plants, and people. Moreover, they assume that these shadows are real, and that if you pay a lot of attention to them, you'll understand and succeed in life. They don't, of course, realize that they are looking at mere phantoms. They chat about shadowy things enthusiastically and take great pride in their sophistication and wisdom. Then one day, quite by chance, someone discovers a way out of the cave, out into the open air. At first, it's simply overwhelming. He is dazzled by the brilliant sunshine, in which everything is for the first time properly illuminated. Gradually, his eyes adjust and he encounters the true forms of all those things which he had formerly known only as shadows. He sees actual flowers, the colors of birds, the nuances in the bark of trees. He observes stars and grasps the vastness and sublime nature of the universe. As Plato puts it in solemn terms, previously he had been looking merely at phantoms. Now he is nearer to the true nature of being. Out of compassion.
All right, so there we go. That's a pretty good place to stop. So what the intelligence agencies and the hands and forces that have created the modern intelligence apparatus learn to do is basically, if you can control what people believe to be true, then you can control their perceptions of reality. And through that, you can control what they want to do, their actions, their thoughts, their even potentially their emotions to a certain extent. And then ultimately, you can control them just like you'd control an animal with a bridle, something like that. So that's what I think the intelligence apparatus has done to our world. Now, I want to take a minute to just talk a little bit about, like, who are these people and what are their intentions and beliefs. And for this, I'm going to play a clip that I don't necessarily know. You might be asking yourself, well, is this clip authentic? Who is this person? And don't necessarily worry about that. I'm just using this clip to illustrate a point, which is that there are people, there's a kind of like dark religion and a cabal religion, a dark cult religion that services the people who know about this. I've also referred to these people as the shadow men. So the people who operate from behind the shadows, or the hidden hand, or like I said, the Illuminati or the globalists is like the front group term. Like, I think if you were going to look for a term to describe who these people were, just from like normal terminology in the world, you could say globalists and you'd be pretty close to the mark. So let's take a look at this clip here. And we'll talk about it in a moment.
Cultural war right now, where we are in control, because basically we are not a political organization, we are an occult organization. We're working behind the scenes to manipulate the way that people think. The war that we are waging is a guerrilla war on the human mind. And we use musical frequencies, the dominant frequency, which I've referred to before, and symbolism and imagery to awaken dormant aspects of the human mind. And what we're waging is a cultural war right now on every front, in music, in literature, utilizing the media against itself. And we're using music because that's the instrument that young people respond to right now. We're doing propaganda directly to awaken the wolf in man. Politics is merely the puppet show of human beings, and we transcend that, but we are interested in the control of human beings for our own purposes. We have no concern for the homeless, particularly. We don't have any concern in helping people. As Adolf Hitler said, we seek to bring about a youth that has closed its heart to pity. All of the humanist values that Judeo-Christianity has encouraged, we want to wipe them out. It's led to democracy, social humanism, the idea of equality. All of this filth has to be wiped out if the human race is going to continue to take the next step in evolution. We are moving into a much more elitist direction.
All right. So I'm sure you'd agree that the substance of what he was saying there kind of certainly seems like what's happening in the world today. And I've done sufficient enough research to say that there is most likely that group. There's several insiders, whistleblowers who've come out. Svali is one that I mentioned. Mark Passio was a former Satanist priest who met a man named Jay Parker, who says he grew up in a dynastic Illuminati family in Arden, Delaware. He said Arden, Delaware. This is Jay Parker saying this now. Arden, Delaware was a kind of like central node, and that he claims there could be as many as 10% of the population in the United States could be full-blown card-carrying members of this dynastic satanic culture, this dark occult culture. I don't know. Like I said, I just, from an epistemological perspective, from an omniological perspective, I just look at all the claims and I consider if they're true or not. And does the claim seem to match what I see in reality? If it does, then I know it might be true. If it doesn't, then I know it probably is not true, but that doesn't mean it goes away. It means they're all held. And that's what omniology is all about, is that you don't really get rid of anything in omniology. You're just constantly accumulating information, and it's always there rearranging itself to help you see clearly. And the more you explore reality and the more you strengthen this muscle, the more automatically it seems like your brain and your mind work together to automatically give you insights about what might be happening. So this is exactly the process I've been using since way before I woke up, but most definitely after I woke up in 2010 as a result of finding suppressed cures for cancer and wanted to try to figure out what the world was all about. So given all this, we have an intelligence apparatus. So what is the role of the intelligence apparatus? And getting back to the original thing we talked about in the beginning of this is this idea of like, who is a CIA agent? Who is actually an agent of the CIA? We might think, oh, well, there's like James Bondian types who are actual agents who are there, working at the behest of their hidden controllers, working with people like Q, if you remember from James Bond, who had the ability to, or worked for the intelligence apparatus to manufacture fancy gadgets and things like this, like remote controlled bombs through pens or, a wristwatch or things like this. And so you might think that is an intelligence agent. And I think that's true. Well, what is an agent? An agent, if we think about the terminology, is basically anybody who represents another body. It could be a person, could be a thing, could be, a spirit. And so an agent is somebody who has agency. It's somebody who's an actor, who is acting on their own volition, who is representing something. Now, you don't have to necessarily be a witting agent. And that's what's really interesting about this, is that when you control what people believe and what they think is real, which is exactly what we have today. Again, ask yourself, how do you know anything? It's because you either heard about it from somebody, you witnessed it yourself, or you read about it through media in some way. It's basically those three things. And, you know, before the advent of mainstream media, it was religion, it was the church, it was the community. Like, how did you believe anything? Well, you usually believe what everybody else believed. If it is written, you know, or it is written is a phrase that, you know, we don't use too much anymore, but it refers to the idea that what is accepted in bodies of knowledge was written on a piece of paper somewhere, and a culture would gather around that written body of knowledge and only acknowledge things that were written, and anything that wasn't written could potentially be seen to be not true or heretical. So, you know, hopefully I'm doing a decent job of explaining like how powerful this actually is, that you can get somebody to believe in something simply by getting them to acknowledge what everybody else believes. And if you can control the mechanism by which people form their own beliefs, which again happens through media, then you can control that person's reality. You can basically create a cave, just like Plato described in the Plato's Cave allegory. So, you know, let's look at education. Where does education come from? The modern day education system. Well, the modern day education system was, unfortunately, I can't remember the names, but I can tell you they're globalists, or the globalists of yesteryear, as I like to call them, the international bankers, the people, Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, you know, people like this, the Bilderbergs. So the people who are at the highest echelons of society, who I think actually those organizations, to go on a sidebar tangent for a moment, and when you think about the Bilderberg group, or you think about the people who gather at Bohemian Grove, you might think to yourself, well, that's the tip of the tip of the pyramid, that those are like the highest of high and the card-carrying members of the so-called elite. But I don't actually think that's the case. One of the things that seems to be clear in the way that these organizations work, at least the ones that we can see, like the World Economic Forum, is you get people, people are looking for things they need to do to be accepted by their society, to have access to money and live in society, and then ultimately to gain social ascendancy so they can gain fame and fortune, so they can have power and influence. Now, not everybody wants to gain fame and fortune, but almost everybody at least wants to avoid being a bum, right? And being a bum is kind of like the quintessential example of somebody who has no status, has no power and influence, and is at the mercy of other people. So because you want to avoid that situation, because what does it mean when you're a bum? Well, it means you don't have a place to live. You're at the mercy of other people, which means you're basically a slave to the whims of others, and you can't control your own life. And in this world, that means that your quality of life is really terrible. You're going to not be able to bathe. You're not going to have access to clean clothes, clean food. You're going to be hungry most of the time. You're going to be uncomfortable most of the time. It's not something people want. So we are motivated to avoid those things. And one of the ways that we manage that challenge is we do what society says. If you're, you know, a good example of this is a prison. You know, if you're a prisoner, if anybody's ever studied the way prisons work, a prison is set up to be a kind of meritocracy. If you do what the prison guards tell you to do, if you honor the rules of the prison, then what happens? Well, you're rewarded. You're rewarded by, one, having a relative amount of freedom. Two, you're rewarded by actual rewards, like potential some amount of prison money, so you can buy things from I forget the term, but it's something like the canteen shop. You can have access to the outside world. You can actually do yard work for some of these extra prison activities. Like you can pick up trash on the side of freeways. I mean, if anybody's ever seen Shawshank Redemption, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Dufresne, I can't remember his first name, and the character in that movie, but Tim Robbins plays this character named Dufresne who goes to jail, and you know he's not happy about being in jail, but he knows he's an accountant and he knows how to do taxes really well, like really well. And so it slowly is discovered after he spends a couple of years in a really awful situation where he's getting beat up and raped and all sorts of things like this, that if he helps the right people, particularly the guards and the warden, then he can get a lot of perks and benefits. And that's exactly what happened. One day, I believe he's tarring a roof, and he talks about or suggests something that the prison guard can do to help provide, a college fund for his kid. And then it's discovered that Andy Dufresne, that's his name in the movie, or character in the movie. Andy Dufresne can help the prison people, or the prison guards and the warden, use his knowledge to secure wealth for themselves, to do their taxes so they're not paying as many taxes. And then ultimately he literally works for the prison warden and is engaged in all sorts of shenanigans that basically allow the prison warden to mobilize the free labor of the prison, so that that prison warden can, you know, offer that free labor to industrialists and people in the society, the general population, who need that low cost labor to produce things. And then he gets a cut of the deal when it's produced. Now, what I just described is exactly how our world works. Our world works by creating a prison yard situation where every aspect of that world that we call the free world, like think of, you know, your town that you're living in. You really think it's free? You can do anything you want? Absolutely not. You have to follow the rules. And if you follow the rules, then what happens? You keep your basic freedoms. So you're not going to go to the hole. You're not going to go to jail. You're not going to have your house taken away. You're not going to have excess fines imposed upon you that require you to work, which then means you're giving up your freedoms. And if you work for the right people, if you choose to go along with the agenda, then you can be rewarded lavishly. That's exactly what we have in our world today. You know, very early on in my attempt to understand all this insanity that has plagued our world for a very long time. This was back in like 2010 and 11. I've made the connection that, you know, it's funny, the world is kind of set up like a grand concentration camp or a grand prison. There's a website that was very popular. I believe Paul Joseph Watson and Alex Jones somehow co-founded it together. It was called Prison Planet. And it basically describes that the whole world is a massive prison where you've got the general population, or who are the prisoners. They don't have free access to everything. They at best, especially if you're starting in the lower rungs of the situation, you know, you have to honor certain rules to get food stamps, to get the shelter, to go work at a job where hopefully, if you're lucky, you can make enough money to slowly gain enough wealth to start to slowly climb up the ladder. And the higher you climb up, there's these gateways, there's these doorways of initiation where if you want to move on to the next run of society, you have to pledge your allegiance in some form or fashion to following the orders or the direction of the warden of the prison that we call planet Earth. Well, that's exactly how our world has been set up. The people who control all of these hidden influences in society, often, most especially the legal system, the financial system, and the media, those are probably the three biggest ones. And then by extension, politics and government. And then industry, if we want to keep going. But, you know, they're all tentacles that eventually consume almost every sector of society. But just to focus on those three, you got the media, the financial system, and the legal system. Then you can control almost everything about society, because think about it. If you want to start a business, let's say you're an average person, you make $30,000 to $40,000 a year, which isn't nothing, but you're hardly going to be, you know, the talk of the town, and, you know, buying up real estate properties everywhere. But you've got enough money to pay your rent, to pay your mortgage, to have a car, to have the tools that a good house slave needs to have in order to succeed in life. If you want to get a loan, what do you got to do? Well, you got to prove to the people who make loans that you can be trusted, that you're going to pay back the loan, and then ultimately that you're going to use the money for a purpose that they want. If I've never had the ability to get financing, for the most part, and I'm not talking about like a credit card or something like that. I'm talking about like significant amounts of money where if you actually wanted to start a business, you could. Like I've got too many business ideas, and then I know what to do with, you know, which is a blessing and a curse. It's part of the reasons I do business consulting, is because I'm just fascinated by all this stuff related to business. Because of the things I study, I got a unique insight into what makes a business successful and what doesn't. And you'd be surprised how many businesses are kind of flying by the seat of their pants. And, you know, no offense to business owners, but a lot of them aren't necessarily making good decisions because we're not taught how to make good decisions. We tend to think that, you know, a quick assessment of a business proposal or a business decision using kind of like a quasi-emotional gut-based process is going to get you, you know, the keys to the promised land. But that's not the way it works at the higher levels of business. And really sophisticated levels of business, and I would say the military and government is one of those ways, although, you know, government's debatable. Every proposal is carefully assessed to determine what effect that proposal would have if it was carried out on everything else that's being done. So they use an omniological process, and they use a council process, meaning that an idea is discussed in a council, in a committee, in a boardroom situation. And if it's done well, if it's done honestly, if it's done comprehensively, then you can often avoid a lot of landmines and actually not dial in on what will probably be successful if you've got people who are actually honest and good people that you can trust in your council. You know, and unfortunately, most business owners don't have that. But anyway, I digress. The point is that if you want to get a loan for a business, if you want to get $1 million to start a business, like I have this really cool business idea where I want to develop, there's this compound or this product called effective microorganisms that can be used to basically replace all modern cleaners, and in the process not toxify your house. And it can be used to break down the toxins in our clothes and plastics and phones and you name it, which are everywhere. Everything in our modern society is in some way, you know, filled with toxins. So, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we had a compound that you could literally make yourself in abundance as much as you wanted, and then with that compound you could use it all over your house to cleanse your house of toxins, to actually deal with the things you need to deal with, like mold and, you know, pathogens and stuff like that. And you can even use it to restore the gut bacteria of your body. That's what this stuff is. And man, I would love to create a product based on that concept. But you need money to do that. You know, it's going to take, like, I estimated somewhere between 3 and 6 months just to develop the concept properly, including sourcing and manufacturing and product labels and a marketing campaign and branding and all that stuff, which is a pretty short time frame when you think about developing a business concept. But, you know, this is just part of the fun I have when it comes to these things. But I need money to develop it. And then I need resources to actually get the first line of product on the market. And then I need to, you know, marketing funds and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to take money. It's probably going to take somewhere in the, like, I don't know, at least $100,000, probably somewhere more like the $500,000 to $1 million range. Well, if I went to a bank right now and I was like, hey, I want to develop this amazing product that's going to help restore the environment, help remove toxins out of people's lives, help restore people's gut bacteria, help provide benefits to 1 million different people need this product for, and it's all natural, and it can compete and actually do a better job than almost any other cleaner you can imagine, you know, they're going to be like, F you, we're not going to do that. You're going to threaten our whole game. And what's their game? Their game is to toxify the world subtly, weaponize and mobilize and profit from the diseases that are created from that toxic world, and otherwise distract and subjugate the human population through the false doctrine of mainstream medicine, so that they stay sick and distracted on the slave plantation that is modern civilization. And so they're not going to give me my money, you know, most likely. You know, I haven't necessarily attempted to do so, but I'm just kind of banking that's probably the case. Maybe if Trump wins and, you know, he does, well, I think he will win, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how long it's going to take for him to do what I hope he's going to do. But, you know, maybe that when that time comes, I can knock on his door and ask for a loan. But anyway, so how is it that people have been bought into believing that vaccines are healthy? How is it that people have been bought into believing that the educational system is actually good for them and is good for their children? How is it that people have been deceived into believing that giving your kid up to a daycare system and letting them, you know, zone out in front of the Hollywood media and cartoons and now in the internet age, videos made on YouTube is a good idea? How is it that, you know, we are made to believe that there's nothing toxic in our mainstream food? How is it that we're made to believe that the products and services we get, from tampons to clothing to spandex to yoga pants to rubber to latex paint to electronics, are all non-toxic and won't necessarily hurt our bodies? How is it that we're meant to believe that, you know, our elections are sound and there's no election fraud happening? Well, it's all through this media apparatus. And the intelligence apparatus works with the media apparatus to control almost every aspect of our lives. That quote that I read for you, which I'm going to read it again because it's so powerful. Let me see if I can pull it up. The easiest way to inject a propaganda idea into most people's minds is to let it go through the medium of an entertainment picture, where they do not realize that they are being propagandized. That's how it happens. That's why the intelligence apparatus is everywhere. That's why the intelligence apparatus has been working with Hollywood for so long. You know, so I'm going to read you a section of an article that I wrote. 1 second. Oh, there it is. I'm going to refresh the page here. There we go. So I'm going to, here, I'll scroll up to the top so you can see this article. So and in my usual form, this article I wrote is about 10,000 words. So you know, for those of you who like to read, you have at it. But this is on my Substack. If you just go to justindeschamps.substack.com, you can also go to justinstillness.substack.com. It'll go to the same place. Then you can read this article. It says, Trump knows that Biden isn't Biden and the dawning of the Great Awakening. Now, this article is the main thesis of this article is that the Biden that we know of from the Obama era, I call him Obama Biden. So the guy that was around from the early 70s and has been in politics for something like 50 years, 40 years, and was the vice president to Barack Obama. And then, you know, somehow something happened to him between, like, I don't know, 2017 and 2018. Some people think he died. Some people think he, you know, was surgically altered. I don't know what happened. I'm just telling you that I don't think that guy, the guy who emerged to run against Trump in 2020, is the same man. So anyway, this is what the thesis of that article is. And I take the time to explain a whole bunch of different things in this article. And one of the things that I talk about is occult symbolism. So, you know, I would say that the elite, or is it, well, first of all, that Trump is fluent in the symbolism, that he knows about the symbolism. I think almost everything that comes out of Trump's mouth is in some way a symbolically loaded statement. Now, does that mean, like, you know, every little thing that happens can be broken down to point to something? Maybe. I don't know. Because, I mean, if you think about it, the truth is like that. The truth is one. The truth is a singularity. All information that is contained in this thing that we call the truth is perfectly interwoven with every other aspect of information or reality in a way that is truly mind-blowing. And it's a testament to God's incredible creation. And I think, although we certainly cannot become God in a total sense, I think we can pursue the wisdom of God. And by seeking him out, we take on the attributes of God. And that's kind of what worship is all about. But in any case, not to get on too lost on rabbit holes here. So I think Trump is fluent in the symbolism. I think the Q operation was specifically designed to, at least in part, help elucidate the fact that he is fluent in the symbolism. I think the occult, I think there's two forces. There's, to group them loosely, there's a light occult, which means okay, so let me back up for a second. You need an occult for a couple of reasons. You might be like, well, anytime you hear the word occult, it's bad. Well, not necessarily. Occult simply just means hidden. And we hide information for a really good reason, because if you give too much information to somebody when they're not prepared for it, it could destroy them. And then they could go out and hurt a lot of other people. You know, a great example of this is children. If you gave a 6-year-old a handgun and you just let them do what they wanted with it, and they had enough information to know how to use it, they might shoot their friends, they might hurt themselves, they might kill their parents, they might do all sorts of different things. See, so the way the universe works, as far as I can tell, and this is what the grand design of God's creation is, that it's as above, so below, or as it is in heaven, so it is on earth. That God kind of let all of reality, or let me rephrase, the truth of all of reality is there. It's out there to be discovered, but you have to gain fluency with it. And that requires humility. It requires your willing choice to pursue the truth. And then through that pursuit of truth, gain enough knowledge about yourself and the world to gain wisdom, which means the how to use the truth effectively to do the things you want. And then through that, you become more and more aware of, you know, reality. And so the more truth you absorb into yourself and discern and then integrate into what I call true knowledge, which is just simply what it sounds like, true knowledge, then you have more and more power in the world to do what you want. And there are two competing groups in our world. There's, to use the left hand, so this is my left hand, although on your screen it's the right hand. On the left-hand path, you have the dark occult. So there's the people who have accumulated a large amount of information about reality, and for arguably thousands of years, possibly it's even before the dawn of modern civilization. So before around 6,000 years ago, reaching all the way back to before the Younger Dryas global disaster that wiped out what a lot of people believe are hyper advanced civilizations, which I think is a very plausible theory to consider. You have a group of people that have been accumulating and arguably know about a ton of different things. And so at some point in history, they decided, or it so happens to be, that there was a loss, there was a downfall of civilization. And that downfall of civilization mean the secrets of the truth were lost, and the people who held on to them as a result of having more information about reality than everyone else had the ability to kind of use that in a malevolent way to control other people. And so that left-hand path is the dark occult, the people who hide information from the masses to gain an unfair advantage over the masses. It's like playing, Monopoly with somebody who's just started learning to play it, doesn't really know how it works, but you're a master of it, and then using that superiority to win the game. Or the game of chess, same thing. If you're a master chess player, and you line up a 6-year-old to play with you, and you're going to be like so happy with yourself that you beat the 6-year-old, and this is the first time that they're playing. And that's kind of the way the dark occultists are, and I frankly treat them and think of them that way. They're a bunch of spoiled brat little bitches, not to swear, but who think that the secrets that they've held on to gives them some kind of superiority over the man, and they have their own delusional religion that makes them think that they're superior to other people, and because of that, they can do all sorts of horrible things to the rest of humanity, which I think they are just cowards, they are fools, and ultimately there will be a redemption for them, and I think that's what Trump represents, who is part of the light occult group. So this is the right-hand path, which again on the screen appears on the left. So you're seeing it as my left hand, but I'm actually touching my right hand. My wedding ring is on the left, so there you go. So the light occultists know that you can't just reveal the secrets of all creation to humanity, because humanity has unfortunately fallen into a kind of, infantile state, and just like a child shouldn't be given, too much information. The human race can't be given too much information, or they'll blow themselves up or hurt each other or do all sorts of horrible things to each other. So they're just like a wise parent, I think. We have to use a slow process, a guided process, a structured process of raising the children that are in humanity to get them to the point where they can be at our place, our level, and then we can all move forward into the future together. That's what I think the light occult agenda is. And so I think Trump is a part of that light occult agenda. Let's see. Let me go back to this. So anyway, so there's all sorts of elite symbolism. Again, Q Operation goes into some of this. I get into what O plans are in omniology a little bit, how the military uses an omniological process, that Trump has been speaking to the media and has been a force in the media for a long time. I personally think that the Trump operation started something like 40 years ago. It's possible that Trump was recruited into this program and this operation as far back as when he was in, I don't know if it was West Point, but he was involved in some military training. Forgive me for not knowing exactly. And I think he was chosen for a very specific role, if not bred specifically for this role. Another crazy thing that you discover when you start to study a lot of these things is that this idea of, the Jesuits, for example, there's a reason why in Dune, the Bene Gesserit are trying to breed the Kwisatz Haderach, if I said that properly, which is this super being who has the power to wield all of their incredible knowledge and wisdom through himself to do all sorts of amazing things. It's because the Jesuits and the occultists of the world kind of believe the same thing, and whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we have somebody like Donald Trump who, strangely enough, has really strange birthday numerological significances. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like, the day that he, his inauguration on January 20th, 2017 was the 777th day of being born, something like that, or a year. Forgive me, I know you guys probably know better than I do. I don't keep all sorts of random facts in my head. That particular set I haven't quite memorized yet. But the point is that there's good reason to believe he might have been, potentially even bred for this role. All right, so Trump's got a history of coded messages. And let me move to, I'm going to talk about, and at some point in this article, I talk about the birth of, there we go. So the intelligence apparatus that shaped the modern world. So again, the question is, or the thing that we're exploring is like, well, who is an agent of the intelligence apparatus? And my claim, which I haven't necessarily been explicit about up until this point, is that everybody is. Every single person is a part of the intelligence apparatus, whether they know it or not. Why? Because if you believe something that you think is true, and that was given to you by the intelligence apparatus, which is almost everything in our reality, almost every piece of media, every piece of music, every book, like that guy was just talking about in that, the Twitter video we watched earlier. He said they use literature, they use music, they use movies, they use magazines, and now they use the internet. And almost unequivocally, every single thing that we've encountered in our lives is in some way influenced by the intelligence apparatus. Now, does that mean that, when you pen a text message to your friends that you're acting as an agent for the intelligence apparatus? Well, if you buy agent of the intelligence apparatus, you mean that A, you know that you're an agent, and B, you're trying to do something to benefit an agenda of the CIA, then not necessarily. If you have to know these things is what defines you being an agent. But what if you're doing something that is pointing in the direction of where the globalists want society to go? What is their agenda? What do they want? Let me just pull the screen out so I can talk to you more directly here. Well, their agenda is they use divide and conquer, right? So if you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off and you justify to yourself that you want to hate on that person, and if you met them off of the road that you'd give them the middle finger and all that, well, isn't that an aspect of division, divisiveness? And would that not breed contempt for your fellow man that can be mobilized by the satanic elite that want us to be divided? Absolutely. What if you're, think about the narrow path concept. That if you want to actually manifest your full potential that God put inside of your heart, inside of your being, you're in your DNA itself, what would it take to do that? Well, you'd need to pay attention to the right things. You need to expend the right amount of energy and focus and resources on pursuing the right things. And then through that, there is a careful and slow process of pursuing excellence. You would manifest your full potential. You'd kind of like, in a way, you'd have like a kind of Jesusonian moment where you'd make contact with the spirit of the Father, and then that Father would then guide you. And I haven't written about this too much, but in one of my writings that is soon to be released, I don't know when exactly because I've got some things slowing my life down right now, but that's okay. It's part of the challenges of life. But I'm going to describe how actually that's kind of like the promise that God has for everyone, that every single person has this power, this opportunity to manifest their true potential and then wake up in the dream, so to speak, of life and do exactly what Jesus did, which is start to actually commune with God in a more direct fashion, and then God can give you instruction for how he wants his will to be manifest. And that can either happen directly, like through theophany, meaning that God is literally speaking into your head, or it can happen because your mind and God's mind are one, and that's what Jesus would talk about, right? Me and the Father are one. Now, does that mean that you're literally like Jesus? No, I'm not saying that. So for those of you who are like, oh, that's hypocritical, well, I'm not saying that we literally become like Jesus. But in a form, we become like Jesus because we absorb enough of the truth, which contains the will of God, that then we can actually do the will of God as if it was our own will. And that's kind of what I think, the point of life is. And so we have that power. And so in order to do that, it takes a lot of time and energy. And if we spend most of our time playing video games or watching soap operas or being pissed off at our neighbors or, doom scrolling on Twitter or you name it, then what happens? Well, if the cabal's agenda is to prevent you from doing that so they can use you to as a pawn in their schemes, then don't they win? Isn't that exactly what they want to do? Absolutely. And that's the crazy thing about this subject is like when you really boil it down to who is an agent and who isn't, the only people who are not agents are the people who can successfully discern what their agenda is, discern what God's agenda is, because they're diametrically opposed, meaning the globalists do not want to do what God wants to do, and God wants to do the opposite of what the globalists want to do, or the cabal or the Illuminati. And so if you can discern the difference between those things, then you can choose with every moment you possibly can to do what God wants instead of what the globalists want, instead of what the Illuminati want. And as a result, you'll be acting against their agenda. Now, I think, to be fair, we unwittingly probably do this a lot, and we wittingly do it. Like when you choose to research something so that you're not going to be deceived by the latest piece of propaganda about how elections are fair, or how the COVID shot's okay, or how Kamala Harris is the greatest gift since Martin Luther King, or you name it, a piece of propaganda about Trump. When you're discerning through their lies, you are countering their agenda. When you decide not to eat that toxic food and try to maintain your health, you're acting against their agenda. When you decide to support your fellow patriots and not be divisive and see past the divide and conquer schemes, which are everywhere in the truther community. It's, considering how much divide and conquer there is in the truth community, it's a miracle that we haven't all killed ourselves yet. But what my point is that you're actually working against their agenda, I think. And so the main point I'm getting at is that the cabal does not have to put shackles on you and force you to do their will. In order for their will to succeed, in order for their agenda to succeed, all they have to really do is stop you from achieving your true potential. And then they will succeed because you won't get in their way. Because think about it. If you're trying to do God's will, again, this is my right hand. If you're trying to do God's will, you're trying to walk the right-hand path, and they're trying to do their will, which is the opposite through satanic inversion. They're trying to do the opposite of what God wants them to do. Then when you wake up and you discover who you truly are, and that you are potentially a son of God, and choose to pursue that, and then become an actual son of God, then what's going to happen? You're going to try to stop the bully. You're going to try to tell the truth. You're going to try to tell the people about the toxic food. You're going to try to do all these things that are going to undermine their agenda and put it back in its box. And so they need to stop you from doing that more than anything. Like I would argue that if we were to group the cabal's agenda into a couple simple categories, one of them is to advance the things they want to advance in this world, which is the technocratic slave state, which is the inculcation of satanic values into society so that we willingly choose to do the will of the Satanists and arguably the personification of evil, which is Satan or Lucifer. So if we choose to do the will of Lucifer, then we are opposing the will of God, which means we are doing their will, and they want us to do that. And there's a whole bunch of people who are willing to, watch porn as much as they can, engage in horrible child sex abuse, sell drugs, take drugs, zone out, tune in, drop out, all that kind of stuff, so that they become pawns for the system, all without realizing it. That's the crazy thing, is that society is currently structured so that if you want to gain as much wealth and status as you can, you're going to have to become a good house slave. And the more of a good house slave you become, the more you participate in the enslavement of others. Now, I was just talking to American hypnotist about some of this. And, it's funny, people might think to themselves like, or to speak to something somewhat personal, I guess, in the sense that I'm involved in I'm a content creator. I've been trying to make my money exclusively through being a content creator for a while. And frankly, if it wasn't for the cabal constantly pulling the feet out from under me, then I probably would be pretty well off right now. But this is like my fourth time having to restart everything because the globalists have ripped ripped my support systems and deplatformed me. And so, when you try to make money as a content creator, you're often labeled a patriot. You're trying to sell products. Like right now, I push Ascent products, which, by the way, link in the description. Make sure you grab yourself some humic and fulvic acid and all that. And, by supporting myself financially, you know what I'm not doing? I'm not working for the cabal to help enslave and pursue their agenda. Most people are not doing that. I guarantee you 90% of the people who would be quick to call me a patriot or label other people in the truth movement a patriot, meaning people who are trying to make money from their content creation work, are themselves working for the system. They are house slaves. And I'm not saying this to be like, snide or, divisive or anything like that. I'm just speaking a fact. If everybody has to make money in this world unless you're independently wealthy. And even then, your wealth has to be managed, and that management of wealth requires being engaged in the system. So if you use money in any way, shape, or form, and you benefit from money in any way, shape, or form, whether you like it or not, you are a part of the system, the plantation that the globalists set up, which means you cannot escape it. There's no way to escape it. So you can either try to use your time and energy and focus to gain that as much truth as possible, to become a son of God, and as a result, work to counter their agenda with as much of the things you can possibly and effectively do. Or you can, be an infotainment junkie, which is no offense to everybody who's an infotainment junkie. I'm an infotainment junkie. I like entertaining myself with information, and in some way work for the very people that enslave you. And so, the reason why that I think is related to our subject is because the question is, who is an agent? Who is an agent of the system? And an agent of the system is anyone who is carrying out the will of the system, who is acting to further the agenda of the system, which is almost everybody. Do you pay your taxes? Do you pay a street ticket light when you get a traffic ticket? Are you buying food at one of the various organizations and companies that the globalists set up to profit from? Are you paying your internet bill? Are you using a cell phone? The bottom line is we all are. Nobody, as far as I know, is completely and utterly outside of the system. We all have to in some way play on the plantation that is the globalist system. And so what does that mean? It means that, and this is something I've talked about before, I won't try not to speak too much to it here, but if we really want to deal greater and greater blows to the cabal system, we have to get unified. When two people learn how to produce something on their own outside of the globalist system, and then they can exchange what they produce with each other, whether it's a good or a service. This is why I do business consulting, because I actually want to help other patriot business owners with what I've learned as a result of starting many businesses, is that when you exchange when you do business with another patriot, now you're acting outside of their system in some capacity. Not totally, because again, they own the monetary system, they own the information system that we call the internet, they own all these different systems, so you can't totally get yourself out of it, but you can make a little bit of progress. And if we all did that, if every single patriot who loves Donald Trump, to cite the Trumpian population, decided, you know what, I'm going to work with everybody who loves Trump as a patriot, I'm going to consider a potential ally and find some way to work and support that person, then we will have, in that moment, have done more to advance freedom in our world than arguably every other patriot combined in history. Well, maybe with the exception of the Founding Fathers, who did that, by the way. That's a lot of the Founding Fathers who came here as colonialists wanted to get away from the British system, which was basically the globalist system of its day, and said, hey, you know what? Let's go out into the middle of nowhere in North America somewhere, and let's carve a life out for ourselves with our ingenuity, with our industriousness, with things that we know how to do, like building houses and raising chickens and, growing crops and things like this. And the more independent we are of their plantation, the more we can not only live a free, happy life, but we can also work against their agenda to one day free the world. And I think that's what the American dream is really all about. It's not just about making as much money as possible and, going on vacation in the Bahamas and things like this. It's about decentralization. It's about, living independently off of the globalist grid, and then using your power, wealth, and status to pursue, maximize, and become like Jesus, become a son of God, and then help to counter the globalist agenda so the right-hand path eclipses the left-hand path. So the only people that I know of who can claim to be doing that are people who want to actually work with each other in some capacity. Now, the challenge is there's a knowledge that's been stripped from us that we don't know how to do this anymore. And so more recently, and those of you who know what I'm talking about, the last time that I was recently, how can I say this politely? I had the carpet pulled out from under me was not because I was deplatformed by Mark Zuckerberg, although that happened. or, had my PayPal account taken away, or my Venmo account, or my MailerChimp account, or had Google censor me. All of those things have happened. It was because another group of patriots decided that they didn't want to work in trust, in honor, and actually talk through things the way the founding fathers did. They wanted to believe their own hype and blame me for things that I never did, and then not give me a chance to explain myself, and then kick me out of the organization before I had a chance to try to right the situation. Because there were some not so good things happening in there, which I haven't talked about publicly. And at some point, I think it is important to talk about, not necessarily to throw shade on anyone in particular, but because it's the things, it's the sin that's the problem. It's not the person necessarily. The person can be forgiven, the person can be redeemed, but it's the method of the madness that needs to be exposed. Because if we don't expose that method, then we are enslaving each other, all believing while we're being free. And that is exactly what has happened in our world through the intelligence apparatus. How is it that somebody can, start a business and hire their friends and pay their friends nothing while shoveling mountains of money into their personal bank accounts and believe that that's the right thing to do? Well, it's because they don't know any better. It's because that knowledge of how to actually run an ethical business, which is not an easy thing to do, especially in our world, has been deprived. We live in a denatured ethical business world, and because of that, we actually are enslaving each other, and we don't know it. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the history of the intelligence apparatus, then we'll start to close out, or begin the process anyway. So the early beginnings of the intelligence apparatus that shaped the modern world. Bill Casey, an American lawyer who was the director of Central Intelligence from 1981 to 1987, is credited with saying, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." This might seem hyperbolic, however, when one considers the fact that in the modern age, the vast majority of the Western world derives its sense of reality from the media, be it TV, radio, or more recently, big tech platforms on the internet. It becomes a lot easier to believe Casey was telling the truth. So what does that basically mean? Again, if anything that you believe to be true, ask yourself, where does that come from? So it's not necessarily that what you learn online or learn in your school book or learn in, from CNN is ultimately totally untrue. It's often because the truth is not a single isolated fact that exists outside of the rest of the universe. The truth is actually a thread woven in the tapestry of all that is, which means that if you don't see how those connections actually affect everything, then you could be being deceived, because the truth is the whole thing. I often use this visualization in my own mind anyway. Hopefully it translates to the podcast here. So imagine all of the truth as a tablecloth on a table. And imagine when you're talking about a specific part of that truth, that you're picking up that tablecloth and you're pulling it up. And it's like you got a piece of the tablecloth that's up, pulled away from the table. Well, you might ask yourself, well, where does that point of truth start? And where does the greater truth that's connected to everything else end? And the answer is it doesn't. You might be focusing on one piece of the tablecloth that you're pulling up, but that the end of it is the whole tablecloth itself. And the truth is just like that. And this is why you need to use an omniological process, a bicameral process, a philosophic process, a critical thinking process, a truth-seeking process. If you really want to not be deceived, and you really want to free your mind from the matrix, if you really want to not accidentally enslave your fellow man. Because even if you believe this truth, even if the part of the truth that you believe is actually accurate, if the things it connects to aren't accurate as well, then you could be walking off of the narrow path and accidentally engaging in something that's hurting you, hurting your fellow man, and ultimately a part of the agenda of the left-hand path. So here we go. Another dismissal of the notion that the past 8 years have been a coordinated movie or of deception is the sheer cost and sophistication of what it would take to pull off. Meaning, I'm talking about here like, the Q operation that some people believe, and Donald Trump has, in a way, talked about this, central casting, this kind of stuff, and Q has talked about this, that it's possible that the victories of the patriot, of the white hats, of the light occultists already happened, that all of this work to free the planet, for at least with respect to the hidden hand, already happened in 2017. at least the bulk of it. And what we're witnessing now is the slow process of taking that cave-dwelling population, to cite the Plato's cave, and bring those people up out of the cave and begin the process of showing them how the phantoms they were looking at on the cave wall are actually representative of real things, so that they can actually gain a true sense of reality. And I think, in a way, that is what seems like what we're seeing. Now, does that mean literally everything is part of this grand coordinated agenda? And even the people that have died through the vaccine, or the guy that was killed at the recent Trump assassination attempt, was this part of the grand movie too? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, to consider that for a subject, that subject for a second, well, how much would you pay to have a truly free world? Every minute, every day, every week, every month, every year, millions of people suffer, die, are killing each other, hurting each other. So if we do nothing, you might be thinking like, well, if I had the choice between killing, that ethical conundrum, you're on the train tracks and you have the choice to do nothing and kill this person or I think it's kill 3 people on the train tracks, or pull a lever and kill a single person. What do you do? And it's kind of like that's the situation we find ourselves in right now in the world. What if you were Trump? What if you're the light occultist? You had this knowledge of everything, but you knew that the only way to get the job done was to go through this grand deception, or this grand movie that involved real people dying and suffering. Would you pay that price? And if you just from a sheer mathematics perspective, just from a sheer, cost evaluation perspective, well, if you do nothing and 5 people are going to die, to use the train tracks ethical conundrum analogy, or millions of people, potentially billions, because the globalists apparently want to depopulate the earth by as much as 7.5 billion people. And you have the choice between letting all those people die because you want to do nothing, and then giving the world that's left over for the next 1,000 years to the cabal, for them to continue their machinations, to perfect their technocratic state, to turn us all into mindless Borg drones. Or you could have some number of people die and be hurt by the COVID vaccine, which helped wake people up. Or, have some number of people die and suffer from the amount of illegals that came through the border, which certainly has happened. Or have people starve or get cancer, all these kind of things. What would you do? I'm not saying I justify it, but these are questions that, frankly, people who know way more about what's really at stake have likely had to grapple with. And just to be, clear about my position, I think every moment of every day, you have to make a choice. There's no choice that doesn't come without a cost. And the best you can try to do is try to make the choice that has the least amount of cost across time, not just in that moment, but across time. And that's the ethical conundrum that, that's the, not to be too snide about it, but that's the world of adult ethics right there. The adult world, the world of truly difficult spiritual and ethical and moral conundrums, that's what's at stake. That's what the game is. You can never just think that, oh, well, if I don't make this choice, it's not my fault. My hands are washed of it. No, because you could make the choice. That means you chose not to, which means you help become a part of it. Just like if you saw a kid getting kidnapped who you knew was potentially going to be raped and sold into human trafficking, you could be like, oh, well, it's not me. I didn't do it. I saw it and I could have done something, but I decided not to. Well, no. But that child rapist, that cabal member, that Illuminati group, in order to carry out the agenda, they need you not to develop yourself. They need you to fight against your fellow patriotic neighbors. They need you to do X number of things to make sure that their agenda happens, and certainly not to stop them. So anyway, so we live in this world where everything comes from our culture is itself a massive grand tapestry of shadows that, if we do not question them, if we do not seek to gain knowledge, if we choose to become to do nothing, what we're really choosing is to become an agent of the globalists and give the world to the globalists. And I think that's exactly what's happening right now. And so to understand this, let's look to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Like, well, where does our culture end and the intelligence agency begin? Let's take a look here. Here's a brief list. Here, let me read this part. However, we should not overlook the fact that the globalists of the 20th century themselves shaped the modern media machine, which includes movies, TV shows, radio, comic books, fictional writing, sci-fi, and more. Here's a brief list and history of some of these globalist features or figures and their contributions that led up to the world we have today. So we have Cecil B. Rhodes, who was a British mining magnate and politician who played a significant role in shaping the early media landscape. He was a major investor in the De Beers Diamond Company and used his wealth to establish the Rhodes Scholarship, which provides funding for students to study at the University of Oxford. Rhodes was also a key figure in the development of the British Empire and his vision for a global network of English-speaking nations influenced by the formation of organizations such as the British Empire Press Union, the Commonwealth Press Union, and the Commonwealth Press Union. These organizations were instrumental in shaping the early media landscape by promoting the exchange of news and information between member countries and establishing standards for journalistic practice. While Rhodes' contribution to the media industry were indirect, his influence on the development of the global networks and institutions laid the groundwork for the growth and popularization of mass media in the 20th century. Okay, so if you don't know who this guy is, Cecil B. Rhodes, he might be like, you know, one of the founding fathers of the modern globalist technocratic state. I mean, and I would call him actually a middle manager, meaning that you're, not to get off on too huge of a tangent here, but if you're running a 300-year-long operation to transform the world into a massive technocratic concentration camp, then you need to advance technology that you can control, and then you get people to leave their communities, just like the Founding Fathers did. The Founding Fathers came here, they set up these autonomous, decentralized communities that were not on the slave plantation of the British Empire back in the 18th century. And so you're like, how am I going to get these people to leave their freedom and come work in my slave cities? Well, you use technology. You advance, you make through technology, transportation easier through the steam engine, through the cotton thatch, through the printing press, through all these different advancements that legitimately actually improve life because it's easier to do certain things now. And so in order to gain access to that, what do you have to pay the price of? We have to pay the price of the autonomy you enjoyed in your separate community and join the globalist plantation. And we're living in that world. The world that agenda that started, that I just described, began arguably in the 1780s. And it really got picked up in the 1860s. That's when, you know, all these big industrialists really started to get going. The Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, that was more towards the, you know, the beginning of the 20th century when oil became a big thing. But the initial groundwork for that was laid way back then. And so Cecil B. Rhodes is just one of those middle managers. You know, because it seems like the way the central hub of satanic influence works in our world is that they control the financial system, they control the media in some fashion. I'm not saying totally, but in some fashion. And so when you create a new marketplace, people naturally want to fill the vacuum of that marketplace. And then if you control the environment in which those people operate, which is one of these characters, Cecil B. Rhodes, then you can evaluate them, determine if they're going to be part of the agenda or not, which is part of what the whole Freemasonic enterprise is all about, which I don't have time to get into here, but there's significant evidence through a book written by Nesta Webster called, oh man, I can't remember it. I'm sorry, but it's a really fantastic book. I'll put the book in the links in the description here. As a matter of fact, I should probably write that down or I'm going to forget it. Nesta Webster. All right, there we go. Secret Societies and Subversive Movements. Amazing book. Should be required reading. Way more than Catcher in the Rye, which is an awesome book. Don't get me wrong. But so you use Freemasonry and these secret orders, these brotherhoods, as gateways, as doorways. Is the price that somebody has to pay is, are they willing to become an agent for the cabal? And if you are, then you gain more status and wealth in that system. And that's who Cecil B. Rhodes was. So let's keep reading. William Randolph Hearst was a key figure in the early development of mass media, particularly in the newspaper industry. He was an American newspaper publisher who built a vast media empire that included newspapers, magazines, and radio stations. Hearst used the media influence to shape public opinion and public outcomes, often engaging in sensationalism and yellow journalism to attract readers and further his own interests. He is credited with popularizing the use of illustrations and photographs in newspapers, as well as introducing human interest stories and celebrity gossip as regular features. Hearst's media empire had a significant impact on the development of mass media in the United States and beyond, shaping the way news and information were presented and consumed by the public. Yeah, he's a huge figure. Again, I think he's one of these, carefully groomed and recruited and hired figures that was filling a precisely laid out role by the engineers of our modern civilization. The Rockefeller family, particularly J.D. Rockefeller, played a significant role in shaping the early media landscape through their vast financial resources and influence. J.D. Rockefeller was an American industrialist and founder of the Standard Oil, who dominated the global oil industry during the 19th century and early 20th centuries. The Rockefellers used their wealth and influence to shape global politics and economics, used funding media outlets and organizations that aligned with their interests. For example, the family supported the establishment of the Council on Foreign Relations, a think tank that has played a significant role in shaping U.S. foreign policy, and the Rockefeller Foundation, which has funded numerous media and journalism projects around the world. While the Rockefellers contributed to the mass media industry were indirect, their influence on the development of global networks and institutions laid the groundwork for the growth and popularization of mass media in the 20th century. So just those three right there, we have enough evidence to argue that the mainstream media, everything from the music industry, newspapers, the literature, comic books, movies, cinema, the nightly news, you name it, literally everything was in some way part of the carefully designed and engineered media apparatus. All of it. There's not like some time where in the 80s everything was great and if we could just go back to that time, it would be great. No, literally everything. I would argue, and there's significant evidence to suggest that this is true, that the creation of the Gutenberg press itself was designed to deal with this problem. Because if you're you're a dark occultist and you want to weasel your way into everybody's lives so that they can join they can willingly enter the cave and become subjected to your mass phantasm delusions to control their thoughts, opinions, attitudes, behaviors, etc., then you need to influence what they think and believe. And as far back as, arguably, it's even as far back as the Shakespearean era, I mean, the Rosicrucians were apparently part of this, and there's a significant conspiratorial claims to suggest that Shakespeare might not have even been real, that it might have been himself, maybe he was a real man, but the real Shakespeare, the people who wrote that play, the writers of those plays, were not a single man, but actually some kind of, secret society brotherhood type of a situation. Now, do I know that for sure? No, I'm just entertaining a possibility. Considering, again, look at today, how much of the things you see in the news are actual real journalists sharing their own carefully constructed opinions about the research that they've been doing. Like almost none of it. Only in the alternative media do you have people actually trying to think for themselves and formulate their own conclusions. Almost everyone in the mainstream media is in some way either handled or directly working with these intelligence apparatuses, a la, the Mockingbird hearings or the Frank Church hearings where Project Mockingbird was revealed in the 1970s. So, yeah. All right, so the Wellington House. This is a huge one. The Wellington House was a British propaganda organization established in 1914 during World War I. Its primary objective was to shape public opinion in neutral countries, particularly the United States, in favor of the Allied cause. The organization was responsible for creating and disseminating propaganda materials such as posters, pamphlets, and films that depicted the German military as brutal and inhumane. The Wellington House worked closely with the journalists and media outlets to ensure the favorable coverage of the Allied war effort was published in newspapers and magazines around the world. The organization played a significant role in shaping public opinion during World War I, and its methods and techniques laid the groundwork for the development of modern propaganda and its use by intelligence agencies in subsequent conflicts. The Rockefeller Foundation funded a study in the 1930s. This one's fascinating. So you might think like, oh, why would comic books be a big deal? Why would sci-fi be a big thing? That video we watched in the beginning was talking about, how sci-fi seems to be being used as a propaganda outlet, and that the intelligence apparatus, definitively, we know from that Freedom of Information Act request that the DoD was somehow involved in Hollywood in a significant way. So why is that the case? Well, it's like my personal opinion is that the magnitude and scale at which the media could be used to affect their agenda was probably known for a long time, but certainly perfected in its modern form around the time that we're about to discuss. So the Rockefeller Foundation funded a study in the 1930s that examined the psychological impact of the 1938 radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, a dramatization of H.G. Wells' science fiction novel. The broadcast, which was narrated by Orson Welles, caused widespread panic among listeners who believed that the events depicted in the story were real, and they intentionally did that. When that broadcast went out, they made no efforts, as far as I can tell, to actually communicate the fact that they were reading a story. And gee willikers, shucks, we just so happen to have a really great case study to understand the effects of media on the human mind. Yeah, like, you believe that, I got some land to sell you in Antarctica. The study conducted by researchers in Princeton University aimed to understand the factors that contributed to the panic and to develop strategies for managing public opinion during times of crisis. The findings of the study were used to inform the development of propaganda and psychological warfare techniques during World War II and in subsequent conflicts. The Rockefeller Foundation's support for this research highlights the family's long-standing interest in shaping public opinion and influencing the course of global events. No doubt the templates for the 20th century's so-called predictive programming emerge from these early activities. That's right. Earlier in the article, I talk about how predictive programming is not just about, telling the truth so they can get off the ethical or moral hook, which I think is definitely a big part of it. It's about literally shaping reality through incepting ideas into people's minds, in my opinion, which I talk about earlier in this article. Intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA, so here's one, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation played a significant role in shaping the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. This is this golden era where, no offense to Tucker, I would love to have a conversation with Tucker. He seems like a pretty decent guy, although I'm not entirely sure if he isn't just a component of the intelligence apparatus. Maybe, maybe not. But, he often cites, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I don't know if he's actually said this. I think I'm thinking about somebody else. But people will just say this. People often cite the 60s as being like this golden age in this era. It was actually Joe Rogan who I'm thinking about. Joe Rogan talks about, the art and the things and the cars that were designed that came out of the 60s was like, that's why things were so good. And if we could just return back to this freer period of society, that wouldn't life be great? And it's like, yeah, well, unfortunately, the same people who brought us the Eleusinian mysteries from, over 3,000 years ago that heavily influenced the Greek culture are the same people, most likely, or certainly the same methods that want to use, a type of mass hedonism and the cult of hedonism, a kind of religious hedonism, religious secular hedonism, to influence people, to get them to tune in and drop out so that they can become, entrained onto a media machine that subtly, through propaganda, incepts ideas in their minds and as a result controls their behaviors, attitudes, and certainly their political voting choices. So the agency was deeply involved in monitoring and infiltrating various countercultural movements such as the anti-war, civil rights, and anti-establishment movements. The CIA's Operation Chaos, for example, was a covert operation that aims to gather intelligence on anti-war activists and discredit their activities. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound like anyone who's got an opinion that counters the mainstream is going to have that opinion dashed to pieces online or potentially deplatformed? The FBI's COINTELPRO program similarly sought to disrupt and discredit civil rights and anti-establishment organizations, including the Black Panther Party and the Students for a Democratic Society. The intelligence agency's efforts to monitor and discredit countercultural movements had a significant impact on the course of the Cultural Revolution, shaping public opinion and influencing the direction of social and political change in the United States and beyond. Okay, let's see how many more. Oh, we got 11. All right, so we're just going to, I don't know if I'll read all of these because I already covered some of them. So hold on. This one's a good one. There's a movie called Argyle. It's a fairly new movie. It came out like last week, I believe. And it really gets into a lot of very interesting things. So, oh, you know what? I should probably stop this because this, yeah, I can't go over 2 hours because then StreamYard won't actually release the video. So hopefully I've done my job properly. If you want to read more of that article, you can read the Trump Knows article. I'll put that article in the description. I hope you found this interesting and fascinating. And if you want to support our work, use the link in the description for Ascent Nutrition. And, as a final thought on this subject, I think this is why it's so important for us to develop our own discernment and critical thinking faculties and do more than just imbibe the beliefs that we're fed, that we're told are true, but we don't actually validate ourselves. Because the more we can truly claim the truth with our own hands, the more we can develop true wisdom, the more we can shape our own identities and our opinions, and the more that we can help become agents of true positive change, just like Jesus tried to do when he came to this world, just like others have tried to do, and just like I think some people are doing now, like Trump and the Patriots and others. So with that, everybody, much love, take care, and I'll see you next time on Vigilant News.